This lecture is about sleep. What we will do is review some information about basic sleep cycles, as well as information about circadian rhythm. We'll also talk some about what happens with sleep loss. And finally, what are some sleep disorders or some psychological disorders that are related to sleep. Next slide. As we move into talking about sleep, an illustration will be helpful. Think about this question. Why do we sleep better after spending an active day outdoors? Some people's response to this would be, well, because we were active and we wore ourselves out. Another person might say, well, because it was outdoors and the fresh air always seems to make me tired. There is a scientific answer to this question, and it has to do with daily changes or daily rhythms within our body. Next slide. Circadian rhythms are roughly 24-hour cycles. Circadian rhythm refers to things like our sleep-wake cycle. It also refers to body temperature cycles and various other biological cycles that occur. Our daily sleep-wake cycle means that there are certain times of the day that we're more aroused and awake, and other times of the day that we're more sleepy. For most people, in most schedules, the most wide-awake time will be sometime during the afternoon, and the most sleepy time will be later at night. What is it that causes us to get sleepy or to feel more awake? Well, it has to do with our body temperature. And so, approximately a 24.5-hour length cycle, our body temperature will fluctuate. Can you guess which time we're most awake? When our body temperature is higher or when it's lower? Right, I bet you guessed when our body temperature is highest we're most awake. And that's true. Now, these fluctuations in our body temperature are not huge. Most people would say, yes, but the average body temperature is 98.6. And that's true, 98.6 Fahrenheit. But during the day, our body increases and decreases from 98.6 somewhat, and that influences whether we're feeling awake or feeling tired. Research on circadian rhythms has shown that they are approximately 24.5 hours long. Now, this is kind of maybe a cruel joke of nature, because imagine what this means for your own sleep patterns. That your body wants to stay awake for approximately a half hour longer each night and sleep in approximately a half hour longer each day. If you allowed your body to do this, what would happen is eventually your sleep schedule would completely change to where you were awake during the night and you were asleep during the day. So because of our circadian rhythm, we're always fighting a little bit against our own biology in terms of trying to stay awake or trying to get to sleep. One of the ways that this makes a difference is when we deal with the situation of jet lag. Jet lag is the sleepiness that we may experience if we travel from one time zone to another. Generally, it's easier to travel in a westerly direction, because if we travel westerly, we're staying up later and going to sleep later. Whereas if we travel easterly, we're trying to go to sleep earlier and get up earlier. And think about that 24.5-hour circadian rhythm. Naturally, our body wants to go to sleep a little bit later and get up a little bit later each day. So traveling west, we don't experience the same amount of jet lag as we would traveling east. Take a look at the video on jet lag, narrated by Alan Alda. It presents some fascinating information about jet lag and perhaps how it might be treated. Next slide. Here's another question to consider. Why is it harder to wake up after an hour of sleep than after only a few minutes of sleep? Let's say that you lay down for a nap and after a few minutes someone wakes you up. Usually not too hard to wake up. But what if you've been down for a good hour and someone tries to wake you up? It may even feel like you have a hangover. It's so difficult to wake up after an hour of sleep. Why would this be? Isn't sleep sleep? Well, most people's natural response to this would be, well, maybe it was a deeper sleep when we were asleep for an hour. That's a very insightful response. It is true that our sleep has stages, and some of the stages are lighter sleep, and some of the stages are deeper sleep. So in the next few slides, we're going to take a look at the sleep stages. In this picture, you see a boy with attachments to his scalp called an electroencephalogram, or EEG. An electroencephalogram is a device that is used to medically measure brain waves, and is very valuable in sleep research. Picture for yourself a moment that you were standing outside of a football stadium while a game was going on. You couldn't tell what any given player was doing from standing outside and listening, but you could tell when something big had happened because you'd hear the roar of the crowd. In the same way, this is what an electroencephalogram does. It doesn't measure the activity of any given neuron inside your brain, but what it does is gives us a picture of mass amounts of neurons firing. So for example, if there are massive amounts of neurons firing in the front part of your brain, the electroencephalogram will help us to understand what's happening and will help us to pinpoint that. It provides a script that shows various types of brain waves, and we can measure brain waves during sleep, and what we find is that allows us to precisely document when a person has fallen asleep and also what type of sleep they're in. Next slide. As in the previous slide, you saw a script that showed an example of brain waves. This slide shows even more examples of brain waves. At the top in blue, light blue, we see what an awake and relaxed state looks like when we're measuring your EEG. These are called alpha waves. However, when you fall asleep, your brain waves change, and a trained researcher can determine exactly when that change occurs. The first stage of sleep is the lightest stage. It's called stage 1 sleep. Basically, it's a transition between being awake and being asleep. The next stage is stage 2 sleep. In stage 2 sleep, we see some interesting things occurring in the brain waves. There is a spindle, which is a burst of brainwave activity, or brain activity, as you can see in stage 2 sleep. There's also what are called K complexes, which are the large upward and downward stroke of the pen at the end of the stage 2 sleep diagram there. Stage 3 sleep, we're getting into a deeper sleep, and you can see that the brain waves are slowing down. Stage 3 and stage 4 are called slow wave sleep. They're the deepest levels of sleep, and it's hardest to awaken a person, especially during stage 4 sleep. Ironically, even though stage 4 sleep is the deepest sleep, it's also the time when sleepwalking or sleep talking are most likely to occur. The deep, slow pattern of waves during stage 4 sleep is called delta waves. But that's not all. We have one more stage of sleep that doesn't have a number assigned to it. Rather, it's called REM sleep. And my guess is that you know exactly what REM stands for. You've probably heard it before. Rapid eye movement. Let's go on to the next slide and take a look at what happens, how these sleep stages play out during the night. Next slide. In this diagram, you'll see that we don't stay in one stage very long during the night. So beginning at the beginning of our sleep period, we transition from awake into stage 1 sleep, gradually progress down into deeper and deeper sleep through stage 2, 3, and 4, following the blue line. Early during the night, we have more stage 4 sleep. So after the first hour or so, you're probably in stage 4 sleep, but then you come back up through stages 3 and 2. And when we get up to stage 1, we go into a specialized type of sleep mentioned a moment ago called REM sleep. After REM sleep, we go back downwards again towards stage 4 and get more stage 4 sleep, and then back up again. And we may go through 5 or 6 cycles per night of sleeping, going from deeper to lighter to deeper to lighter. The overall trend, though, as you can see in the diagram at the right, is that during the course of the night we have less and less stage 4 sleep and more REM sleep. So our deepest sleep is going to be earlier in the night, and our most active sleep, our REM sleep, will be more during the later part of the night. Let me say a word about REM sleep and what REM sleep is. REM sleep is sometimes called paradoxical sleep. The reason is that there are two opposite sorts of processes going on during REM sleep. One is that we have a lot of internal physiological arousal during REM sleep. Our eyes are moving, our heartbeat may increase, our respiration or breathing can increase. We have more brain activity. We also have sexual arousal during REM sleep. Both males and females tend to experience sexual arousal during REM sleep. So the body overall is in a very aroused state during REM sleep. Now the paradoxical part is that during REM sleep also most of our large muscle groups are paralyzed. The brain does not allow the large muscle groups to move. So your arms and your legs, the muscles in your trunk, are probably not going to be able to move during REM sleep. This is probably to keep us safe during REM sleep because our brain is so active and because we're probably dreaming. And if we were able to move around during REM sleep, we would wake ourselves up or we might actually hurt ourselves. REM sleep, as I mentioned, is a time when we're likely to dream. Now, all sleep stages can involve dreaming. It used to be thought that REM sleep was the only time that we dreamt, but all sleep stages involve dreaming. It's just that REM sleep involves the most vivid, story-like dreams. Next slide. Does it matter if we lose sleep? Well, if you took a sleep inventory to find out if you're getting enough sleep, you may find that you're actually sleep deprived. In fact, statistics show that a lot of people walk around sleep deprived. Typically when I ask my classes to tell me if they're getting enough sleep, it's usually out of a class of 25 or 30 students, usually 1 or 2 students that feel like they're getting enough sleep. The rest of us, myself included, tend to often feel like we're sleep deprived, just not getting enough sleep. So what happens when we have sleep loss? Does it matter? There is evidence that during sleep, if we have sleep deprivation, our immune system tends to be depressed or suppressed, which means we're more likely to get ill because our immune system isn't working as efficiently. Interesting research also has shown that people who get less sleep than they need have a shorter lifespan overall. So getting adequate sleep seems to be an important component of overall health and lifespan. In addition, sleep loss can lead to emotional symptoms and cognitive symptoms like being irritable, feeling grouchy, not remembering well, being less creative. Another area where sleep loss makes a big difference is that evidently 20% of American traffic accidents involve sleep deprivation. Now we're aware of, through the efforts of various kinds of advocacy groups, we're aware of the impact of drinking on our ability to drive and the impact of alcohol consumption on traffic accidents. But the research also suggests that sleep deprivation plays a large role in traffic accidents. Next slide. In an interesting study by Stanley Coren about a decade ago, he took a look at the level of traffic accidents before and after the time change in the spring and the time change in the fall. What he found was that in the spring, traffic accidents went up because an hour of sleep had been lost, and overall there were more accidents as a result of less sleep, even the loss of 1 hour of sleep. In the fall, he found precisely the opposite pattern, that when people were granted 1 more hour of sleep because of the fall time change, there were fewer accidents. Very convincing evidence of the importance of getting enough sleep. Next slide. What about times in which we're not able to get enough sleep or our sleep is of a poor quality? If this is intense enough, we can actually develop a psychological disorder called a sleep disorder. There are various subtypes of sleep disorders. So let's spend a little time going through some sleep disorders. To begin with, the most common sleep disorder is insomnia, and it affects 10 to 15% of all adults in America. Insomnia is when a person has difficulty falling asleep or difficulty staying asleep. So for example, they may have some difficulty going to sleep at bedtime, but then sleep fine through the night. That would be called early insomnia, because they're having difficulty falling asleep. But some people are able to fall asleep quickly, but not able to stay asleep. Maybe during the middle of the night they awaken. That would be called middle insomnia. Or late insomnia was when a person can't stay asleep. They wake up during the early morning hours and can't get back to sleep. This later insomnia is one of the clues that a therapist looks for as evidence of depression. Another sleep disorder is called narcolepsy. When my kids were in grade school, they had an art teacher who was extremely hyperactive, and we asked her once why she was so hyperactive, and she said, "If I'm not constantly moving, I fall asleep." She said, "I have a condition called narcolepsy, in which if I'm not moving, not constantly stimulated, I immediately fall asleep." Narcolepsy is a condition in which a person experiences periodic, overwhelming sleepiness. Now, this is not due to sleep deprivation. It's not just a matter of being tired because you didn't get enough sleep. Rather, narcolepsy has to do with the brain areas that are involved with keeping us aroused and alert, those areas not working properly. So a person with narcolepsy falls asleep from an awake state, oftentimes into REM sleep. Now remember from the sleep stages that typically we go through all of the sleep stages before we get to REM. However, a person with narcolepsy can go straight from, and often does go straight from, an awake state to REM sleep. Some things that can bring on narcolepsy are things like narcoleptic attack are things like laughing, sometimes pleasurable activities. Actually, sexual climax can sometimes bring on a narcoleptic attack. And the person with narcolepsy has no control over whether or not they fall asleep. The next sleep disorder that we're going to talk about is sleep apnea. Picture that you fall asleep and your roommate or your spouse or your friend wakes you up after a few minutes. They say, "Wake up," and you wake up. You say, "What do you need?" And they say, "Nothing," and they walk away. You shrug your shoulders, you lay down, you go back to sleep. 5 or 10 minutes later, they're back, shaking you again. "Wake up, wake up." And you wake up and say, "What do you need?" And they say, "Nothing," and they walk away. Picture this going on for a little while. Would you get upset and angry? Would it disturb your sleep cycle? Now picture this happening all night long, and you've got a little bit of an idea of what happens in the condition called sleep apnea. In sleep apnea, the person frequently awakens during the night, the reason being that their breathing stops. This can happen anywhere from every 10 seconds to a minute or every 5 minutes, and a person with sleep apnea may not get more than 5 minutes sleep at a time. They fall asleep, their breathing stops, their oxygen level in their blood goes down, the brain panics and sends out an all hands on deck alert, and the brain wakes up, and the person wakes gasping for air. They gasp for air, they get their breath, then they fall back asleep, oftentimes not even aware that they've awakened. And this can go on all night long. Of course, a person with sleep apnea is not going to feel rested, but they may never know that they have sleep apnea unless there's someone there to listen or watch their sleeping pattern, or unless they're part of a sleep study in a sleep clinic at a hospital. Sleep apnea is more prevalent in elderly people, more prevalent in men, and it's also more prevalent in overweight persons. The reason it's more prevalent in overweight persons is because the structure of the throat may close off and cause the person to have difficulty getting the breath. Sometimes, though, sleep apnea occurs because the brain center responsible for breathing, causing us to breathe, doesn't work properly. You'll remember that in the medulla is the area that is responsible for our breathing, and sometimes that does not work properly. So that is sleep apnea. End of slide.